Hey guys, good morning. Today we are going to start new chapter Romans. Introduction. Author. The writer of this letter was the Apostle Paul. No voice from the early church was ever raised against his authorship. The letter contains a number of historical references that agree with known facts of Paul's life. The doctrinal content of the book is typical of Paul, which is evident from a comparison with other letters he wrote. Date and place of writing. The book was probably written in the early spring of AD 57. Very likely, Paul was on his third missionary journey, ready to return to Jerusalem with the offering from the mission churches for poverty-stricken believers in Jerusalem. In chapter 15 verse 26, it is suggested that Paul had already received contribution from the churches of Macedonia and Achaia. So he either was a Corinthi or had already been there, since he had not yet been at Corinth on his third missionary journey. When he wrote 1 Corinthians, when you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verse 1 to 4, and the collection issue had still not been resolved when he wrote 2 Corinthians. When you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8 verse 9, the writing of Romans must follow that of 1 and 2 Corinthians, dated 55 AD 55. The most likely place of writing is either Corinth or Cenchrea, about 6 miles away, because of references to Phoebe of Cenchrea when you look at this chapter 16 verse 1, and to Gaius, Paul's host, who was probably a Corinthian. Erastus may also have been a Corinthian. Recipients. The original recipients of the letter were the people of the church at Rome, who were predominantly Gentile. Jews, however, must have constituted a substantial minority of the congregation. Perhaps Paul originally sent the entire letter to the Roman church, after which he or someone else used a shorter form for more general distribution. Major theme. Paul's primary theme in Romans is basic gospel, God's plan of salvation and righteousness for all humankind, Jew and Gentiles alike. Although justification by faith has been suggested by some as the theme, it would seem that a broader theme states the message of the book more adequately. Righteousness from God includes justification by faith, but it also embraces such related ideas as guilt, sanctification, and security. Purpose. Paul's purposes for writing this letter were varied. He wrote to prepare the way for his coming visit to Rome and his proposed mission to Spain. The second one is he wrote to present the basic system of salvations to a church that had not received the teaching of an apostle before. Third one is he sought to explain the relationship between Jew and Gentile in God's overall plan of redemption. The Jewish Christians were being rejected by the larger Gentile group in the church because the Jewish believers still felt constrained to observe dietary laws and sacred days. Occasions. When Paul wrote this letter, he was probably at Corinth. When you look at Acts chapter 20 verse 2 to 3, we can understand. On his third missionary journey, his work in the eastern Mediterranean was almost finished, and he greatly desired to visit the Roman church. At this time, however, he could not go to Rome because he felt he must personally deliver the collection taken among the Gentile churches for the poverty-stricken Christians of Jerusalem. So instead of going to Rome, he sent a letter to prepare the Christians there for his intended visit in connection with a mission to Spain. For many years, Paul had wanted to visit Rome to minister there, and this letter served as a careful and systematic theological introduction to that hoped for personal ministry. Since he was not acquainted directly with the Roman Church, he says little about its problem. Content. Paul begins by surveying the spiritual condition of all the people. He finds Jews and Gentiles alike to be sinners and in need of salvation. That salvation has been provided by God through Jesus Christ and his redemptive work on the cross. It is a provision, however, that must be received by faith, a principle by which God has always dealt with humankind, as the example of Abraham shows. Since salvation is only the beginning of the Christian experience, Paul moves on to show how believers are freed from sin, law, and death, a provision made possibly by their union with Christ in both death and resurrection, and by the indwelling presence and power of the Holy Spirit. Paul then shows that Israel too, though presently in a state of unbelief, has place in God's sovereign redemptive plan. Now she consists of a remnant, allowing for the conversion of the Gentiles, but the time will come when all Israel will be saved. The letter concludes with an appeal to the readers to work out their Christian faith in practical ways, both in the church and in the world. None of Paul's other letters states so profoundly the content of the gospel and its implications for both the present and the future. Special characteristics. The first one is the most systematic of Paul's letter. It reads more like an elaborate theological essay than a letter. The second one is emphasis on Christian doctrine. The number and importance of the theological themes touched upon are impressive. Sin and death, salvation, grace, faith, righteousness, justification, sanctification, redemption, resurrection, and glorification. And the third one is widespread use of Old Testament quotations. Although Paul regularly quotes from the Old Testament in his letters, in Romans the argument is sometimes carried along by such quotations. And fourth one is deep concern for Israel. Paul writes about her present status, her relationship to the Gentiles, and her final salvation. The total we have 16 chapters, so outlines we can discuss. The first chapter is introduction, and in first chapter theme righteousness from God and the unrighteousness of all people. Gentiles, Jews, summary all people in third chapter, and second chapter Jews. And third chapter to fourth chapter we can see righteousness imputed, justification. And third chapter through Christ received by faith, the principle established, the principle illustrated, chapter 4. And in chapter 5 the fruits of righteousness and humanity's unrighteousness contrasted with God's gift of righteousness. Chapter 6 to 8 we can see righteousness imparted, sanctification. Under that we can discuss freedom from sin's tyranny, freedom from the law's condemnation, life in the power of the Holy Spirit, chapter 8. Chapter 9 to 11, God's righteousness vindicated, the justice of his way with Israel. Under that we can discuss the justice of God's resurrection of Israel, the cause of that resurrection. The resurrection is neither complete nor final. And chapter 11 we can discuss there is even now a remnant. The resurrection is only temporary, and God's ultimate purpose is mercy. And chapter 12 to 15, righteousness practiced in the body, the church, in the world, among weak and strong Christians. And chapter 15 conclusion, and chapter 16 commendation, greetings, and doxology. So these 6 chapters we will discuss in our Bible study chapter by chapter in coming days. God bless you. Thank you.